So in this session, we are going to explore the idea of using case studies, testimonials, and recommendations to improve your marketing. We all know about this kind of stuff, but how many of us are actually doing this in a very conscious way? How many of us are actually using case studies, testimonials, and recommendations as part of our content strategy? Probably not too many of us. So the idea behind this particular session is to see and explore the various options that we have available to us, because there is some big opportunity within this topic. So let's kind of get a little bit of background here, because we need to kind of almost justify why this is really important to us. So as a starting point, let's look at a little bit of research. So Nielsen, a big research house, say that 92% of all consumers report that a word-of-mouth recommendation is the leading reason they buy a product or service. So that is a piece of advocacy. That is something that might come from a case study, a testimonial, or recommendation, or just literally a conversation in passing. 92% of all consumers saying that that would be the leading reason why they buy. So, if you're obsessing over your features and benefits, or your advertising, or your content strategy, actually, the key place where people are making these informed decisions are through the recommendations, the testimonials, the case studies, and the advocacy. So this is something that we need to see at the core of everything that we do, because of course, if we don't, we could be missing a trick or losing out with regard to our competitors. Lightspeed research, another piece of evidence here, 67% of consumers say they would not buy a product if it has as few as 3 negative reviews. So if you get this wrong, in other words, if you don't include this as part of a proactive, positive content strategy and really plan your way into this, you stand a very good chance of actually switching off those potential customers who are looking and consuming these kinds of reviews. So this is super important. So it is now time that we begin to do this really proactively. Okay, so let's begin with a definition, because we need to kind of understand really what we're talking about here. So let's start with case studies. Okay, so the purpose of a case study is to describe a situation, that might be a project, a campaign, or a product maybe, in detail, identifying the key issues and how they were solved by added value execution of innovation, processes, systems, and thinking. In other words, the before versus after. I spend a lot of time kind of convincing people and encouraging people to really think about the difference. In other words, the added value that goes into something. So that could be their inputs into a particular activity or something that they're doing at work. Or it could be, in the case of the case study here, the difference that this case study has actually made to somebody else's life. So it's this added value execution of innovation, processes, systems, and thinking. In other words, what was it behind the scenes that made the difference? And that is the purpose of the case study. Where did you make the difference? So not what happened so much as what actually benefited the person actually being involved in this. Okay, so this is quite subtle, but really important. So the benefit here is to describe the added value bits of what it is you do, not just the fact that somebody spent this amount of money, they got this kind of output and that was it, and there's an example, because that is just an example. What you're looking for here is the difference that that example made. So that is really important. Okay, so what kinds of case studies or types of case studies could we be talking about? Well, generally there are 3 types. One is descriptive, one is explanatory, and the other is exploratory. So the descriptive is, we're going to tell a story about the process, the change, the difference, the system, the thing that kind of was in place there that made the difference. Could also have explanatory. In other words, a case study that actually explained the journey. So it actually kind of documented the process. And that, for lots of people, can be interesting because, if you deal with quite complex processes or quite complex sort of buying pattern, if you like, or a buying process, then actually explaining it step by step, literally step by step might be a really great example of the execution of the simplicity of actually what it is. So you're reducing the risk, or you're giving the customer the confidence that, okay, well, if I go down this route as well, because clearly somebody else has gone there before me, if I go down this route as well, it probably will give me a pretty good outcome. So it's kind of about building the faith and the trust that going with you would be a good decision. You might also look at the exploratory case study. So that is very much about kind of exploring in a much more detailed, granular level of detail what actually went on. Now, again, for some slightly more technical services or products, for example, that might be a really, really good thing to do. So kind of exploring opportunities. Maybe this is where the innovation piece comes in. Because if you offer a bespoke or customized service or product, an exploration of the various ways that that can be used or shaped directly in line with customer needs could be a very, very interesting way of approaching it. So overall, the goal of the case study is to help the reader or viewer understand that they can receive a similar value experience or outcome through engaging and working with you. So this is about building the confidence and the understanding that they will get what it is you're actually producing, or what it is this potentially third party are producing about you. So giving that kind of snapshot view of the experience. So they will then be reducing the risk of this purchase decision on their side. So it is a lot about perception, but it is a lot about perception through evidence that is shared. So kind of what would a case study look like? Well, formats can be very, very varied. You can have written case studies. You can certainly print them. I've seen over the years a lot of case studies that get produced in, brochures or leaflets, or loose leaf sort of flyers that could go into folders or into sort of catalogs, but also now, and predominantly now, long form video. So this is the kind of stuff that people are really interested in doing. And a case study, you could argue, is something like, an unpacking review. We see a lot of these on YouTube, for example. So could you foster, could you encourage, could you incentivize your customers actually producing more kind of long form video around the experience that they've had? And where would you publish this stuff? Well, obviously, if it's printed, and you can use that as kind of sales and marketing collateral. But often these kinds of case studies will appear and feature on a particular brand's website. So these are kind of owned content, it's owned media, but it becomes very interesting in terms of the high quality, certainly search engine optimized content that you're actually producing. So there's kind of a win-win-win. There's a win for you because you've got a legacy kind of archive of what happened. There's a win in terms of the search engine optimization because the website's probably going to perform well. And there's also a win from the prospective customer or prospect or lead. When they see this content, it will build the confidence. So loads of great reasons why a case study is going to really work for you. So I would strongly suggest you have a little look back over some of the recent sales activity that you've done, some of the recent sort of projects or campaigns you've been involved in, and see if you can find a few examples of case studies that you might be able to produce. And even if it is only for internal consumption to start with, I mean, what a great kind of motivator, what a great inspiration if you can share internally in your organization a great case study of something that's just happened, because it allows people to kind of all come up to the same kind of level of the quality that you've been giving and adding to customers. And of course, when you do that, it introduces the second of our topics, the second of our little features here, which is the testimonial. Now, the testimonial is defined as a formal statement testifying to a brand or person's character and qualification to provide value in a specific area of expertise. Now, this is an interesting definition because a lot of people almost leave the testimonial to the other person. So please write me a testimonial. Please, come in with a testimonial because, you've obviously enjoyed what we've done for you. Can you write me a testimonial? And they kind of leave it to the other person. And then often what happens is it's quite vague. It's not really to the point. It can often sound quite generic. So the idea here is that you help the third party, whoever they happen to be, to get really, really focused, almost laser sharp focused, to identify through maybe 1 or 2 sentences where you've actually added value in a specific area of expertise. Okay, so probably what this should say is testimonials, because you probably want a number of these to then cover all bases, because a single testimonial probably just wants to advocate you for one thing, because otherwise it can almost sound like, oh yeah, no, you paid them to say that, or it can be, no, I think you must have written that yourself, because it just sounds too big and too grand and too good. Whereas actually, if you focus in on providing a specific piece of value in a specific area of expertise that, you know, advocates your character, the brand style, the experience, but also the qualification to deliver that value, then that's where you're going to get the best returns. So testimonials that are really, really worth their salt are the ones that are really, really focused and really, really targeted. And how do these kind of come about? Well, generally, as I say, they're very much shorter than a case study. You wouldn't see a testimonial probably that goes over, you know, multiple pages or paragraphs. Generally, what you're looking for here is 1 or 2 targeted focus sentences, or maybe a 60-second short form video. So just a little clip. These are going to be things that are very, very easy to consume by the other person. And they make you look qualified and quantified. Okay, so this is the important bit about the testimonial. Make sure it's qualified. Okay, so it should be written by or created by a person just like the person's being targeted with it. In other words, what you're doing is you're trying to make the other person who's going to read the testimonial think, oh, this is done by somebody just like me. And of course, if that is the case, then it's much more likely to resonate. And also quantified. Make it definite that it has tangible, measurable evidence within it. So if you can give a number, if you can quantify something, if you can give this really, really, really specific evidence that backs up the comment and this 1 to 2 short sentences, if you can back that up with numbers, some sort of objectivity, it will become immeasurably more powerful as a testimonial. And where would you publish it? Well, generally, in any channel that is in the customer's journey just before the point of conversion. Okay, so think about that, because why would you publish a testimonial? You know, lots of people, you know, brandish these all over the place, but actually when somebody needs the testimonial to just get them over the edge from turning to a prospect, from a prospect to a customer, it's just when they're about to commit, just to give them that final little boost of confidence that, hey, this is going to be a good decision. Yep, I'm going to go for it. So the testimonial just before that point of conversion, just before signing on the dotted line, just before giving the credit card details, just before, you know, asking for the sales visit, those kinds of moments are when the testimonial really comes into play. And what would that look like? Well, again, obviously short and punchy is best, because at that point, they're just about to go for it. They're just about to convert. And so keeping it really short and punchy is just that nice little kind of feel-good factor that somebody just like me has committed at this point. Great, okay, I'm going to do it. Click the button. So that's generally where you'll put that into the mix. But they can go in other places. You might want to be putting it in your social bio. You could put it in, you know, any obviously literature or any sort of advertising or campaign activity that you do. But in terms of, you know, the place where it mostly happens, it tends to be towards the back end of the awareness phase of the customer journey. And so now on to the big ones, the recommendations and word of mouth. Okay, because we've already seen how powerful this can be for you. So a recommendation, what is that? Well, it's a suggestion or proposal as to the best course of action, especially one put forward by an authoritative body. In other words, this is where you might start to use, and I'm going to use the word cautiously here, but the word influencer. Okay, so anybody who gives you a recommendation is an influencer of the person they're making that recommendation to. Anybody who talks about you, and this is word of mouth, and it can be digital or face-to-face, are an influencer. So we're not talking about the big global influencers here. We're talking about anybody who will be willing to advocate your brand message or your product or the service that you offer. Okay, so the word of mouth is the spreading of the good messages of the things that you're doing. Now, your task, as we said right at the start here, is to try and get this as early as you can into your content strategy, because this is where your big wins are going to come from. This is really where it's going to happen. And I just want to read you a little bit from Marketing Donut, because this was a little piece that came out sort of quite recently that really backs up actually what we're talking about here. And so let me just read this sort of to you. A consumer will only recommend something if they're prepared to put their reputation on the line, says Steve Barton, president of the Association of National Advertisers. Provide such a good service that customers spontaneously recommend you to friends. However, only about 15% of your customers will actually be influencers. It doesn't matter if they don't buy the specific product themselves. What matters is that they talk to people about it. You need to get these people involved. This was an article by Marketing Donut. Now, there's a lot of really, really key points in here that I just want to dwell on just for a moment. So they need to be considered as putting their reputation on the line. In other words, they're entrusting you to deliver on this recommendation. So, if I recommend your product or service to one of my friends or colleagues, or I mention it in social media, I actually am putting my reputation on the line by doing that, because then if somebody then does purchase or does go for it on my recommendation, it better be good. So your role as content marketer, as marketing manager, as content creator, is to make sure that, one, you're not over-promising, because obviously you need to be able to deliver on the things that you're saying, but two, that you actually fuel your potential influencers. So this is anybody who's going to use word of mouth to recommend you, that you give them stuff they can share. Okay, make it easy for people to advocate you. Make it easy for people to kind of share the good things that you do. So if you're creating content that is very, very consumable, but also very, very shareable, then that's the best way of doing this. So putting like buttons on everything, putting, share buttons really, really close to really good dynamic content that you're creating is a very, very good starting point. That's probably the easiest way of doing it. And when it comes to word of mouth, don't be shy of asking for the recommendation. If somebody comes back to you and says, oh, this is really great. I'm so pleased. Thank you so much for doing what you did for me. Ask for the recommendation. Ask, because they're in that moment of being potential advocate for you. Just ask, is there anyone else who we could do this for? Do you know anyone who's also in this particular stage of their lifestyle or their life cycle? Is there anybody else that you know who you could recommend us to? Please do. What would we be able to give to you to be able to do that? So even if it comes down to gently incentivizing them to do something like that, this is what builds loyalty. This is what builds long-term relationships, because if you've done something good for somebody, they are in that moment where they're going to be willing to share. And how much does this cost you? Absolutely nothing but some attention and some time and some gratitude. So this is really what we're looking for. So Marketing Donut carries on by saying, look for an influential industry figure with a good reputation, or a social media guru with a specialism in your business area. Getting recommendations from these people will yield big returns. The key is to identify the talking point, what your influencers want to talk about, rather than what you want to say. Be shareable. So let's pause here just for a moment. So rather than you be thinking about, hey, here's my latest kind of sales material, here's my latest flyer, would you be able and willing to pass this on to a friend? That's not what this is about. This is about truly listening really openly to what your customer has just said about you, and then making it very, very easy for them to say the same thing to the people they can influence, their friends, their family, their colleagues, whoever it is. So by seeking these people out, and it could be somebody who's in your database who has given you a 5-star review. It's the 5-star review is great. That is the case study or the testimonial, but it's not a recommendation. The recommendation is where they take that experience on and start to talk to others. So that's the key leap forward that is. So it is the next step forward. So it is more important, it is more engaging, and it does take more of their time and energy. But of course, at this point, they're willing and able to do that for you. So grab that moment. And if you can find influential figures within your industry who have got a good reputation, who you would, see your brand being aligned with, and that's an important point too. Don't just grab anybody because they happen to have a big voice. Make sure it's an organization or a person who is willing to kind of align with your brand values and tone of voice, and get them talking, help them to talk, and ultimately be very, very easy to share. That is the key here with the recommendations. And so what's this doing? Well, actually, we've talked here briefly a little bit about kind of this whole social thing. I've said about, increasing the sort of the trust and sort of faith and confidence in the audience that you're looking to influence here. There's a concept here called social proof, which is something that is a really good benchmark for when you start to do this. And social proof is what we might term earned media. Okay, so I talked right at the start here about owned media. That's where you are kind of creating case studies, probably on behalf of a customer or a stakeholder who's been particularly happy with your service. You might do it in collaboration with them, but that's kind of owned media because you produced it. Social proof is what we call earned media. Now you've earned this. This is your big payback time in social, when somebody happens to give a review, when somebody does the unboxing and says, oh, this is just such a great experience, I've had, dealing with or buying from this particular brand or person. This is social proof. Okay, expert social proof is when an industry thought leader or influencer approves of your product. So if you're really going to punch above your weight here, this is a quote from HubSpot saying that this is the best quality earned media, because if you can get somebody who is well thought of, influential, somebody who is taken seriously when they say something, when they give a review, when they comment on something, people listen. Well, this is expert social proof, and this will come back to reward you big time. Okay, so if you're spending all your time doing paid campaigns, doing lots of kind of paid for advertising, banner stuff like that, that's basically paid media. Owned media, it's kind of obvious that you own it, so it's obviously been produced by you. Paid media, well, it's pretty much the same. You've just dipped your hand into your pocket to spend some budget, but this is the best quality earned media because somebody else has talked about you, somebody else has advertised you on their behalf. So this is what people generally trust the most. So this is almost the holy grail of case studies, testimonials, and recommendations, because if it comes through in social, you have also then the multiplier effect. You're likely to reach, well, obviously 10 times, 100 times, even more than that, the amount of reach for that particular post or that particular message if it goes out via somebody else's content. And of course, the trust level, because somebody's put their reputation on the line, means that people will trust it. So hold tight and get ready for those orders and that phone to ring, because social proof, when it comes through in this kind of way, is really what we're looking for. So what are the best ways to get social proof in your marketing? Well, invite experts to take over your social media. So get collaborative, start to, do those reviews, maybe in collaboration. Maybe you have this kind of live sort of focus group or something like that. Get really, really open and authentic with what it is you do. Collaborate potentially with experts for a social media event, maybe put on a webinar or two, put on an open forum or a conference. These are very, very easy things to do with the likes of Zoom and StreamYard and organizations like that, and platforms that allow you to kind of do this live collaborative stuff. Show appreciation for mentions. If anybody does move, you've got to be all over it. So make sure you're listening as much as posting in social. And share the milestones within the organization. You've got to build momentum with this stuff. This is not a one-time activity. Once you go all in this, you're all in. Okay, so you've got to factor some resource, that's some time, people, and budget to really be awake and aware of what's going on. Experiment with the whole micro-influencer marketing. By micro-influencer, we're talking about people who are really, really influential in a little micro niche of what sector or market you serve. Okay, so we're getting really down and personal here with this. Maybe explore as well having brand ambassadors. That's an interesting one, because if somebody is super loyal and has been an advocate of yours for a long time, it is time that maybe they are considered a brand ambassador, because that is what they're doing. So reward them for that. Maybe a tour of the factory, or maybe you go out and wine and dine them, or whatever it happens to be. This is the point of brand ambassadors, treating them well, and they will continue to treat you well. There needs to be a win-win. They're doing it for a reason, because they obviously align personally with your brand. So reward them as such, because they're marketing on your behalf. And the interesting one at the end of this list from buffer.com is that you could curate user-generated content. That's an interesting one. For those of you who are thinking about thought leadership in the mix of this, curating user-generated content can be very interesting. So maybe even creating a page on your website where you actually curate all of the kind of social proof that has gone before, all of the reviews, all of the recommendations, all of the above, those little conferences or focus groups or online stuff that you've opened out to the big wide world. Maybe if you can curate that user-generated content, because of course it's not you saying it, it's everybody else saying it. Think about how that might improve the quality of the content that you're providing. So what I'm not saying is you've got to replace all of your content strategy, but you can see, I'm sure by now, the value, the real value that this can actually bring to you and your organization. Now, the next little quote, which was a series of things that you can do as well to, again, really accelerate this kind of social proof, it comes from Social Pilot. Now, I don't completely agree with this, because what they say, well, let me tell you what they say first, and then I'll give you my spin on this one, because I think we need to kind of rein some of this stuff in, because it is super positive and it sounds really exciting, but there is a little kind of hint of realism I think we need to kind of, sprinkle across the top of this. But anyway, Social Pilot says you can use testimonials as social proof on social media. Yes, you can. You can embed social media testimonials to your website. Yes, you can. Then it says you can follow accounts from social media on your website and show the number of social media shares on your website posts. That's the bit I don't fully agree with. A lot of us are not working with social media accounts that have millions and millions of followers or millions and millions of pieces of engagement on a daily or weekly basis. So those numbers, the follow accounts and social shares, might be small numbers. So I think we need to kind of rein this in. Yeah, if you're a macro global influencer, yeah, you can probably do that and it'll look really impressive. But if you're working in a niche sector, if you have a niche product or service, or you're coming from a very low base or a standing start, showing some of those things might be quite demoralizing for you and the business, but also it might give the wrong impression that actually you're not really a serious player. So to me, I would keep all of those kind of numbers away. So any of that kind of social following, keep that away from this. Go for quality, not quantity. And Social Pilot then finishes off by saying, and include user-generated content as social proof on your website. And I'd agree with that one too. So I think I'm partly in agreement, but I'm also kind of tempering this with kind of realism. Unless you're a big global brand, the chances are you're going to probably want to keep this social media follow accounts and social media shares and engagement numbers to yourself. Just keep that kind of under the radar. It's not really that significant important. What is important is the quality of the social proof that you have. And to me, that's the really, really important thing. So it is about being socially shareable. Love those words, being socially shareable. So if you make content very easy to share by everybody and anybody, and you can do that through things like Google reviews, sharing, a Google review request at the end of a really, really positive piece of engagement with a customer, they're very likely to just jump into their Google account, write you a quick review, and there you go. Very, very shareable. Same with Facebook. Facebook reviews, if you do any kind of Facebook activity, be it you've got a Facebook online shop, or you use Business Manager, or you're currently doing advertising, or you just kind of invest time and energy in your Facebook page, Facebook reviews can really, really score. And it can very, very quickly and easily put you above your competition. Depending on which industry you're in, you might also consider something like Trustpilot, getting those 5-star reviews on Trustpilot. Again, the name kind of gives it away, Trustpilot. It's helping you to fly into this world of trusting advocacy. That can also be very good. And if you're looking at this from maybe a more personal perspective, and think about this for your own, sort of career development and your own sort of personal branding, LinkedIn recommendations, very, very socially shareable. And again, give the reader or the audience the confidence that actually you are a trusted professional. So think about LinkedIn recommendations. Again, it's all in the mix. Many other services like this are available, but for me, those are the big four really: Google reviews, Facebook reviews, Trustpilot, and LinkedIn recommendations. So let's try and pull this all together now. Let's try and sort of see what would be the top 8 things to create this advocacy plan. Let's call it that. So it weaves together case studies, testimonials, and recommendations, the advocacy plan. And so I would say the best kind of one, and this is inspired by Paul Rand, who's the author of Harnessing the Power of Word of Mouth, which is a really great book. If you haven't had a chance to look at that one, get yourself a copy of that, because it goes into a lot more detail than we have time to cover here today. But here's 8 points of things that you can do if you want to create an advocacy plan within your content strategy. Point 1, where are your and your competitors' brands talked about and recommended? Where are your and your competitors' brands talked about and recommended? So think about that. Do some research, go and do some listening, figure out where already you're being talked about, and do look at the competition as well, because you might not necessarily be in the place where they're being talked about. And the question then, of course, is, could you? Point 2, share stories in simple conversational language with a clear single call to action. Advocacy is all about being simply shareable. So having a single call to action, click this button to share. That is what you want, a clear single call to action. Don't make it complicated, make it conversational, which brings in the personal bit. Remember the phrase social media? Well, the clue is in the word social. So single call to action based around conversational language. Keep it simple. Point 3, ensure everyone in your business is aligned, aware, and uniformly using it. So if you've got a recommendation, if you've got a case study, make sure everybody knows about this thing. Don't just keep it within marketing and on the website. Make sure you're using it in your internal communications. After all, this is the best news that your business has once it's kind of achieved its sales figures. This is what it's all about. This is the feel-good factor. And who wouldn't like good news? So make sure everyone in the business is aligned in sharing. Point 4, discover and activate your micro-influencers who influence purchase decisions. Another little piece of research that you might need to do. And these are micro-influencers. They might not have a great big social network. They might not be the loudest voice in town, but if they're influencing others, they can be in your advocacy plan. So find out who they are, treat them well. Point 5, 80% engagement and 20% of actively sharing content. 80% engagement and also relationship building. Spend your time in your advocacy plan finding out who these people are and engaging with them. Just 20% is in the content. It's not all about the content. It's all about building the relationship with your advocates. So devote the attention there. 80-20 will really comes into play here. So your content, you've got to do that bit and make content that's shareable, but you've got to have those relationships first. Otherwise, this thing is not going to fly. Point 6, neutralize detractors and monitor the traction of detracting messages. Everything I've spoken about so far has been positive, but make sure you have a contingency plan for when the review isn't so strong, for when somebody absolutely comes down like a ton of lead against your products and services, or absolutely canes your service levels. What are you going to do when that happens? Being ready, having the right kind of level and style of response is really important. And we're going to do a session on contingency planning and crisis management a little bit later in the year. But having a kind of a view and neutralizing those detractors very early in that level of engagement is really important. But do it positively, and don't think it's just all about pressing the delete button. It's about engaging, it's about listening, and it's about being empathic. Well, why did they feel this way? Is there something we can learn too? Point 7, measure progress with clear key performance indicators. Monitor and assess and continuously tune. You are never going to get your advocacy plan right first time. This is the point. This is a lovely ongoing journey, but you have to make a start. So set some clear key performance indicators, things that you'd like to have as little benchmarks to show good positive progress, but keep those numbers realistic to start with. This is going to be something that probably for most of us is going to be an addition to what we're doing already. So make sure you're realistic about what you set as a target, even though you know in the future you probably do want to scale this up. And then point 8 is the lovely one at the end of the process, which is share the success across the business and repeat. Because as soon as you find a formula or a method for case studies, testimonials, recommendations, word of mouth, and creating and stimulating this advocacy, once you get the success, once you start to see some good outcomes here, it is just about pressing the repeat button, constantly listening, constantly fine-tuning, and constantly getting better and better every day.